Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Ball Fake Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and support our new movement by putting Let's Go Viral in the comment section. But if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. But without further ado, here are your hosts, Nicely Chugga and Greg King.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Ball Fake Podcast, members of the Off the Ball Network. And in today's episode, I want to talk about Chet Holmgren as a prospect, what to expect from him in his first season in the NBA, playing alongside Shai, Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, and for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I also want to talk about some of the deficiencies within his game, some of the concerns that everybody obviously is within question of, and how some of those deficiencies that he provides can be corrected as we look to potentially reach his ceiling as an NBA player. But before we get started with today's episode, if you guys are new to our YouTube channel or listening on any other podcast streaming platform, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, turn on post notification, and give us a 5-star rating and a nice review on all podcast streaming platforms. That being said, let's get started with today's episode because, Chet Holmgren has shown us since he's bursted onto the scene that, he was going to be a lottery pick. And, he finally became that. He's a number 2 pick in the 2022 NBA draft. And this is a guy with a ton of upside, right? He has the necessary intangibles to become an all-star level player at some point in his NBA career. And, despite that, there are a few deficiencies within his games and, some questionable things that could be career altering and, negate him from reaching, his maximum potential at the NBA level. And I want to talk about some of those things, right? Because, clearly there's a lot of things that Chet Holmgren brings to the table. Like I mentioned, offensively, I think he's one of the better 3-level scorers in the NBA around his age group. This is a guy that, can create a lot of self-generated offense, doesn't necessarily need to be set up or needs the deck to really be set for him. We've seen situations where he can score around spacing at the NBA level during Summer League. And we've seen instances where, at the college level, he was playing alongside Drew Timme, a guy who clogs the paint a little bit and still fairly had enough success to be able to, turn into a number 2 pick and a lottery pick moving forward, right? That being said, there's going to be a lot of things that Chet Holmgren offers on the offensive side of the basketball, right? I think this is a guy that's going to be one of the better offensive decoys in the entire NBA, especially if he reaches his maximum potential, right? This is a guy that can stretch the floor out for you at a 40% clip. He's also somebody that's shown signs of being able to draw bigs away from the basket because of that and being able to create his own shot off the bounce consistently. And we've also seen an area under his game where it's not really talked about a lot, but he is a formidable and adequate enough playmaker in a half-court setting that really can allow, guys like Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and hell, maybe even guys like, Jalen Williams and Lou Dort thrive off of, some of his passes and things of that nature. Because Chet Holmgren is going to have a ton of gravity at the NBA level, given his size, position, and what he's able to do offensively from that standpoint, right? And overall, I think, he's going to also be able to benefit playing alongside guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's going to grant a ton of attention from the opposing team's defensive players and things of that nature. And he could find himself slipping to the basket out of pick and roll scenarios and being able to just finish above the rim and transition and things of that nature, right? Because this is a guy who will be able to not only find mismatches in the half-court setting, because if you put a smaller wing on him, I think he has the ability to be able to shoot over the top of some of those guys because of the height and the shot making ability that he's got. But he's also somebody that can bring the ball up from coast to coast in transition. And in instances where the defense isn't set, he can find himself some really preferable matchups and being able to not only shoot over the top of guys, but just being able to create a lot of stuff offensively in the open break for not only himself but others. But with that stuff being said, there's still a few concerns with Chet Holmgren as a prospect overall. Right now, given he's a 7-footer, he's going to be looked to be the defensive anchor for the Oklahoma City Thunder moving forward, right? This is a guy with a pretty prominent shot blocking skill set. I think one day he can rank amongst one of the top players in the NBA from that standpoint, just because he's such a high level defender from a shot blocking perspective, one of the better rim protectors that I've seen within his age group. And I think that aspect of his game more than likely will translate to the NBA level, right? And not to mention him being able to really be versatile, covering a lot of ground in pick and roll scenarios. He doesn't allow bigs to drop past him, and he does a really good job of keeping guards in front of him and being able to alter their shots around the rim, and just being an overall really good paint presence from a defensive perspective in those instances. And ideally, this is a guy that provides a lot of the things that you would want your defensive anchor to be able to do. Now, the one deficiency that, you know, Chet Holmgren has to offer is the fact that within all of that, you know, this is a guy that isn't that prominent of a posterior defender. Now, granted his position, there's not going to be a lot of guys that have a lot to offer offensively at the center position in today's league. I mean, you have guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, who are generational talents. But, you know, despite some of those guys, ideally, I think Chet Holmgren, he can probably still have some level of success at the NBA level defending posterior defenders, just because, you know, most of those guys don't have the offensive fortitude to really punish him on a consistent basis. Now, that being said, the biggest issue within all this is the fact that, you know, a lot of those guys might not need to even have the offensive fortitude to really punish Chet Holmgren on a consistent basis, because, you know, he's so thin and frail defending guys offensively with their back against the basket, right? And that's going to bring us a high level of concern, because ideally he can find himself in a lot of those situations where guys are just dumping the basketball down low into him and really trying to, you know, really wear him out, right? You know, with him not providing a ton of strength at that position, despite his size, you know, he can still be a liability on the defensive end, at least from that perspective, right? And I think one way to combat this would be to, you know, ideally bring in a guy, take him more so off ball, kind of move him to a Robert Williams type of role where he doesn't have to, you know, absorb as much contact and things of that nature, right? And have to, you know, play as much bully ball, because ideally Chet Holmgren's ceiling as a defender will drop if he's not able to absorb contact consistently, if he continues to show the inability to be able to defend posterior defensive matchups, even in instances where, you know, it's a low frequency. And ideally this could lead to lower stamina for him, and he could have a hard time in terms of, you know, playing back-to-backs and surviving an 82 game season, because this will be the first time in his career where he's going to be playing a high quantity amount of games in a short period of time, right? You know, this is no longer the college level or the high school level where you're playing 1 to 2 maximum games a week. You know, he's going to have to play back-to-backs, and there's going to be nights where, you know, there's 3 games and 4 nights, and you're going to be traveling city to city and not sleeping in your own bed. And I think the improper rest that he might get would definitely affect his game overall and allow him to not be as prominent of a defender that he has the capabilities of being. Now, granted, with that being said, we've seen teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves heavily invest in, you know, the big man position, the center specifically, and bringing a guy like Rudy Gobert. That way Karl Anthony Towns doesn't have to deal with, you know, as much contact physically, and also have to turn around and have a lot of responsibility as a second option on the offensive side of the basketball. And I think Chet Holmgren, he's going to have a similar case, right? You know, this is a guy who's primarily going to be a second or at worst third option on the floor in his first year in Oklahoma, and given the amount of responsibility that he's going to have offensively, it's going to be really tough for him to be, you know, a prominent two-way guy if he shows the inability to be able to absorb contact consistently, even going up against, you know, lesser offensive-minded bigs in the NBA. And I think in his first year, he might just have to go through some of those growing pains of, you know, being an on-ball posterior defender and things of that nature, right? But I think the best way to correct this is simply just to allow him to play off-ball defense where he's primarily a help defender, similar to Robert Williams, and really maximize his shot blocking ability, because like I mentioned earlier in the episode, I think he has the capability of being able to be one of the top shot blockers in the NBA if he reaches his potential. And that being said, which would definitely be a plus, because offensively he will show signs of being an all-star caliber player. We've already seen it all the way up until this point. And, you know, with him being so thin and frail, like I mentioned, defensively, you don't want him to really put himself in a situation where, you know, he's going to have to miss games and you're going to have to sit him. And ideally, the best way to prolong his career and, you know, allow him to really be durable throughout the course of an 82 game season is by lessening the load for him defensively and not putting him in many situations where he's going to have to deal with a ton of physicality within the interior and things of that nature, whether he's going up against a prominent offensive big man or not. And I think another instance where Chet Holmgren might show some signs of vulnerability, at least from an offensive perspective, is in those small scenarios when he's going up against, you know, those wing defenders, when he gets them switched onto him in those pick and pop scenarios, and he has to, you know, try to blow past those type of guys. Because, you know, Chet Holmgren, despite him having pretty decent handle for his size and position, I think if you're asking him to consistently blow by wings like Draymond Green, a Grant Williams, or Jaylen Brown caliber defender, he's gonna have a little bit of a hard time really doing that consistently. And I think on top of that, you know, that could lead into some turnovers accumulating and overall taking away possession from the Oklahoma City Thunder in a half-court setting, which is something that we definitely don't want. But to combat this, he more than likely can utilize his size and be able to just shoot over the top of these guys. But ideally, if we're being realistic, I think there will be a lot of scenarios in his first season at least where he might cough the basketball up because he's not getting into his shot fairly comfortably. But you guys let me know what y'all think about this in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of me on the Ball Fake Podcast. If you're new to our YouTube channel or listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. But besides that, it's your boy Nicey Chunga Biddy, and we out.